My name is Jeff Townsend, and I'm the founder of the Critical Minerals Association. So the CMA is the UK's critical mineral advocacy body. We're here to ensure that the voice of the critical mineral sector, from the upstream through to the end of the midstream, has a voice and is heard and plays a part in decision making as the UK drives towards its 10-point plan for a green recovery. I'm really excited about this event because I was born on mines and I grew up in mines around the world. Those who know me personally will know that one of my things that I always brag about, quite sadly, is that when I was 4, I remember getting a He-Man Master of the Universe sword from Santa Claus off the back of a fire truck in Leinster in Western Australia, where my dad was on the mine, and subsequently defeating a redback spider with it straight away. Now, I maintain I won that fight, although talking to my dad last night, supposedly I just got dragged away by my mum and whacked around the bum. So I still reckon I won. But Australia has always played a big part in my life and shaped kind of who I am and the way that I approach things. So I'm really, really happy that we've been able to do this and provide a platform for the states of Queensland, South Australia and Western Australia, as well as Austrade, the opportunity and a platform to have their voice heard in the UK. And we try and build those industrial links between companies here and in Australia. With that said, I think it's time we hand it over to our experts. So we're starting today with an introduction from David Grabau, who's going to look at what has Australia got to offer. So if I can hand over to David.
Yes, many thanks for that, Jeff. I'm just pausing slightly for the slides to appear, which are very much in Olympia's capable hands. Many thanks. Jeff, it's probably the most relevant introduction I've heard to one of these sessions, so thank you. And if you claim to have won a battle with a redback spider, I will certainly believe you, because those who lose usually don't tell the story. My name is David Grabau. I head up the Resources and Energy team at the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, otherwise known as Austrade. My role in Austrade is to work with Austrade's extensive offshore network, around 80 offices around the world, to advocate for Australia as a great place to invest, and why would I say anything else, but also to focus on what we consider to be sectors of strategic policy interest. And it's fair to say that critical minerals has been the rising star of this, particularly in the resources sector over the past 2.5 years, but certainly over the last 6 months, we're now seeing a real appetite to understand the opportunities further and to look a little bit more closely at how we can work cooperatively, both in terms of investment, offtake, equity, but also developing partnerships in supply chains and value chains. So it's wonderful of Jeff and the Critical Minerals Association to put this event together. One thing I won't do is speak across my state and territory colleagues who will be following me. More generally, my role here is to provide a platform and to speak more generally about the bilateral relationship between Australia and the UK, Australia's capability more broadly in the resources sector, but also then to start looking at what we're doing in a strategic policy sense to try and advance opportunities in critical minerals. And then look more closely towards the end of the presentation at what we mean by supply chains and how we can look at de-risking some of these, and certainly opening the opportunity up for cooperation between Australia and the UK. If anyone has any follow-up questions, and Olympia, we might quickly go to the next slide. Sorry, I'm not very instructive on this. That will give you an idea of what I'm talking about before we quickly go to slide 3. Several of my colleagues from the Australian High Commission in the UK are present on this call, and I would strongly urge any of you, if you have any ongoing questions which can't be directed straight to the states and territories on this call, to follow up with my colleagues, or even indeed with Jeff. We'd be delighted to help you out in any way we can. Look, it's no surprise to anybody on this call that Australia and the UK have very strong and well-established trade and investment links. Fair to say the relationship beyond the banter before this call started on cricket goes well beyond that into a shared heritage, common values, strong people-to-people links. Also a closely aligned strategic outlook and interests. And most of you on this call will be fully aware of the recent Auckland announcement, which is now providing a platform for, as our bilateral policy forum for policy, defence and security issues. I think it's fair to say that critical minerals will start to feature more closely on those type of the agendas which are discussed at Auckland meetings. I'd also like to speak quickly to some of the recent data on Australia, which may be of interest to those on the call, especially to potential investors. According to forecasts in the following 2 years to 4 years, 2022 to 2026, the average growth rate of the Australian economy is expected to be faster than any other major developed economy in the world. And the Australian economy is set to become the world's 12th largest economy in 2021, up 2 places from 2019. During this period, 2022 to 2026, Australia's GDP is forecast to be around 1.6 trillion US dollars. Also important to note that Australia is home to just 0.3% of the world's population, but will account for 1.7% of global GDP. Thanks, Olympia. To the next slide. So what are critical minerals? Put simply, critical minerals are mineral elements essential to the ongoing high-tech economic development of advanced economies whose security of supply is susceptible to disruption. That's our working assumption on the definition. This may morph a little bit, and I note the close interest being shown in this at COP26. The other element of criticality is that it's a very subjective concept. What might be deemed critical to one particular industry or country may not be so to another. This is evident in the very wide-ranging critical mineral lists that have been issued by several countries over the past 2.5 to 3 years. It's fair to say that no 2 critical mineral lists are identical. And at last count, I think we're up to around 90 mineral elements which have now been deemed critical across the world. For the main part, criticality can be reduced to scarcity, local production capability, ease of access to offtake, stable and secure supply chains, and each country's individual industrial development capability and strategic focus. Above all else, critical minerals are highly vulnerable to price volatility owing to their resource concentration in a small number of countries. It probably comes as no surprise to anyone on this call that international demand for critical minerals is rising quickly, and this has been evidenced in some of the recent price rises we've seen across critical minerals, especially those relevant to lithium-ion batteries, industrial magnets, superalloys, catalysts, and additives. The other point to note is that this has led to a huge amount of data now being available on critical minerals, and I think it's really important that we look very closely at the source of this. It seems to be a cottage industry in development, but I think it's incumbent on all of us to look very closely at what's being written by whom. It's also very important that organisations like the Critical Minerals Association and other government agencies have a close eye on what their strategies are, and we're not completely distracted by some of the other materials that are in circulation. Turning to Australia, as you know, Australia has a long and rich history as a successful mining nation, generating over 220 billion Australian dollars in resources energy trade during 2021. In terms of critical minerals, Australia offers some significant advantages. We are the world's largest producer of lithium, with the third largest resources of lithium globally. And Australia is the second largest producer of rare earth elements, with many untapped deposits. We also have large resources of cobalt, manganese, tantalum, tungsten, and zirconium. Turning to ESG, briefly, Australia has been recognised as a very attractive region for mining by the Fraser Institute in its most recent annual survey. Importantly, Australia is a world leader in sustainable mining, with a history of implementing strong environmental and safety management practices, corporate governance, and voluntary standards and codes of practice. Briefly on our met sector, in addition to our abundant natural resources, Australia has one of the most technically advanced, innovative and efficient producing capabilities in the world. Our met sector has reinforced Australia's position as a global hub for mining innovation. Thanks, Olympia. I think we're on to slide 5. With regards to our commitment to critical minerals, the Australian government has developed a range of initiatives which are designed to support development of this important subsector. These include sector-wide support through trade and investment facilitation, research and development, and standards and accreditation. These initiatives help create a level playing field and build competitive cost advantages through shared infrastructure and precincts. Financial support for critical minerals projects has recently been underlined through the creation of the 2 billion Australian dollar Critical Minerals Fund, which is administered by Export Finance Australia, also known as EFA. The purpose of the fund is to promote the development of Australian critical minerals projects, which has potential spin-offs for potential investors and equity partners. EFA has already signed non-binding letters of support for some Australian projects, including Arafura Resources and Australian Strategic Materials. In addition to EFA and the Critical Minerals Fund, there are other investment facilities which can play an important enabling role, including the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. On the investment coordination side, we also have agencies like Austrade, as well as the major project facilitation agency to smooth out any challenges. And it's also timely for me to call out the role of our states and territories, some of whom are present on this call, who can also talk about how they also encourage investment and help investors through the journey. Slide 6, please, Olympia. So what is Austrade? Austrade is Australia's leading trade and investment facilitation agency. Our role is to connect investors, in regards to critical minerals, rather, to connect investors, both debt and equity, and off-takers to Australian critical minerals projects. At the same time, we work very closely with our premier geological agency, Geoscience Australia, as well as states and territory geological agencies, to try and harness interest in greenfields investment opportunities in Australia. Austrade focuses on markets where we can de-risk, target investment, and build long-standing value chains. In doing so, we leverage our extensive offshore network and relationships with federal, state, and territory governments. At the same time, we work very closely with other Australian government agencies, and I'd like to note the role of the Critical Minerals Facilitation Office, which is a part of our industry portfolio, as well as my colleagues at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So, in many respects, it's a whole of government initiative on the part of the Australian government to look at every element of what we need to do on critical minerals to try and build this opportunity. As I speak, through our global network, Austrade is currently working with 41 Australian critical minerals project proponents. So it's fair to say that we are reasonably well connected in terms of the Australian industry and what they're trying to leverage us for in terms of the work we can do with them offshore. You'll see the photographs to the left of the screen on the critical minerals prospectus. So to underpin our efforts to commercialise the Australian critical minerals sector, Austrade and Geoscience Australia has compiled the critical minerals prospectus. You'll see there we've got 3 editions. I'm delighted to announce that the 3rd edition is due out in early December and will be launched by Minister Tian. The 2nd edition is currently available on the Austrade website, but I would urge any of you who would like to look at it to wait for the 3rd edition. We're pretty confident it's a much stronger piece of work. The 3rd edition highlights more than 40 investment and offtake opportunities for Australia across the 24 Australian prescribed critical minerals. The prospectus includes technical, commercial, and geological data that should, or we hope, should facilitate international investment into these projects. If you'd like any more information on this resource, we'll be in touch with Jeff and his team as well as others around the launch, but we would be delighted to follow up with you if you have any follow-up questions. Next slide, please, Olympia. Look, apologies in advance if I'm testing your eyesight. I'm certainly testing my own by looking at this one. Unfortunately, Australia is a very large continent, so it's very hard to provide a slide of this nature. What we're trying to show here is some of the shovel-ready projects which are currently seeking investment or offtake agreements to move forward. The map highlights key projects recognised by Export Finance Australia as well as the major project facilitation agency. I'd just like to draw your attention to some of the projects which are progressing really well in some of the work they're doing. Obviously, we've got the Lynas project at Mount Weld, which is the current producing project in Australia. On top of that, we have Australian Strategic Materials in New South Wales. Through their WA Rare Earths project, have plans to produce NdPr, hafnium, niobium, and zirconium metal. Moving to the centre of Australia, you'll see a green triangle for the Nolans project. Nolans Bore is run by Arafura Resources, who also have plans to produce NdPr as well as lanthanum and cerium. There are a bunch of other projects. I won't take up too much time calling them out, but this slide does give you a really good sense of the breadth of the opportunity in Australia. Next slide, please, Olympia. Look, I'd just like to speak quickly to what we're trying to do in terms of greenfields investment and new minerals discoveries. As you're aware, Australia has some of the world's largest recoverable mineral resources beneath the ground, and there are many more opportunities for discoveries. Geoscience Australia is reducing the risk of exploration by providing pre-competitive data for new mineral discoveries, especially those in underexplored areas. As a part of this, the Australian government's $225 million Exploring for the Future program is investing in potentially resource-rich corridors identified to the east and the west of Australia. Finally, Olympia, to the last slide, please. Look, I'll probably save the best for last, and I think where this discussion is going to progress further is how we try and unlock the midstream. In terms of our bilateral cooperation between Australia and the UK, we need to start identifying where we can actually match our capabilities and where we see Australia having some opportunities to move into the midstream, potentially through some of the funding that we've got available, and how that matches up with on the demand side from the UK, both in terms of offtake, but also in terms of technical capability. Outside of investment and offtake to support Australian projects, our success is going to be in identifying areas of globally competitive capability so that we can de-risk these supply chains and build value chains. Ultimately, between Australia and the UK, there may be cases for third-party involvement. I think it's really important that we focus on what we can do. In addition to the measures I've already outlined, the Australian government is focusing closely on what can be done to help Australia build downstream capability. For example, resources technology and critical minerals processing has been identified as one of the 6 national manufacturing priorities under the Modern Manufacturing Strategy. As a part of this, the Modern Manufacturing Initiative has $1.3 billion attached, which is designed to build scale in processing critical minerals. The first round of grants have already been administered, and I understand the second tranche is going to be announced shortly. This will importantly help build and explore further how far downstream Australia can get and how we can potentially work more closely with our trading partners to fill some of the gaps where Australia may not be globally competitive. It also helps provide the inputs for future industries and help progress our progression to low carbon economies. Look, that will do for me. I think I'm at risk of slightly going over time, so apologies for that. In sum, thank you, Jeff, very much for inviting me along. I wish the rest of you well for the course of this discussion. Again, if there's any follow-up required here, please contact Jeff or my colleagues at the Australian High Commission, and they'd be delighted to work with you. So thank you.
Thank you, David. That's really much appreciated and gives us a really good overview of what we're discussing in a much broader context. Lots of things in there. I actually think perhaps I don't need to do the rest. I'll just hand over to you guys. But someone has to try and steer the ship. So what we're going to do now is we're going to invite our panel discussion members to join, and we're going to have a chat between ourselves on some issues, and we're going to be trying to explore exactly what David pointed out, which is how do you build those supply chains from upstream through to downstream in both directions, because I think that's important, and also how do you ensure and what are the states doing and what is the government doing in Australia to try and build that and give Australia a boost to ensure it controls and takes its rightful place in the critical mineral discussions globally. So I'm very happy to be joined now by Tony Knight, Chief Geologist, Queensland, Thomas Northcott, CEO of Vecco Group, Jennifer Parker from Lynas Rare Earths, Mark Thompson from Tata Resources, and Matt Pearson from Fleet Space. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give each one of those a couple of minutes to outline who they are, where they're from and what they're doing, and then we'll get into some questions and discussion between ourselves, and then we should have half an hour, 20 minutes at the end. So anyone who's on the call, if you have questions for the panel, please put it into the chat so we can see them, and we'll be able to gain your insights as well. So perfect. So first off, Tony, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Sure, absolutely, Jeff. Thank you, and welcome everyone. So I'm Tony Knight, the Chief Government Geologist for the state of Queensland. I lead the Geological Survey of Queensland, and what that does, it's an economic development agency. And the way we operate is to help enable industry success in terms of them being efficient and effective in exploration, discovery, and development of resources. Because with that comes investment and comes benefits of all sorts. So that's our purpose, that's our operational model. A lot of energy in Queensland around what we call new economy minerals, same as critical minerals, particularly around electrification. That's our real focus area. But I'll talk about that a bit more in the panel session. So thank you, Jeff.
I'm on mute, so thank you, Tony. Next up, we've got Thomas Northcott.
Thanks very much, Jeff. So I'm the Managing Director of Vecco Group. We're a Queensland-based company developing the Dibella vanadium and high-purity alumina mine in northwest Queensland. And in addition to that, a 2 million litre per annum vanadium electrolyte manufacturing facility. So starting to cover a couple of areas of the value chain. Really, our strategy is within that integrated supply chain, and then working to sell that product into the local markets initially within Queensland, and then more broadly within Australia, and before looking to expand overseas to Europe and North America. Our projects at a pre-feasibility stage will be moving to bankable feasibility next year, and expect to have all our approvals and finance in place by late 2023. Our team's currently working on our detailed design for the electrolyte facility. Procurement will commence early next year, and then production from that facility will commence in mid-2022.
Marvellous. Good stuff, Thomas. Thank you. Jennifer Parker next from Lynas.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, I'm Jennifer Parker. I'm VP Corporate Affairs at Lynas Rare Earths, and we have, as David mentioned, a mine at close to Laverton in Western Australia, the Mount Weld mine, which is one of the world's premier resources for rare earths. It's long life, high grade, and from there we produce a material that's processed at our facility in Malaysia. We've got an advanced materials processing plant or refinery in Malaysia, and from there our materials go to customers in Europe, in Asia, and in the US, and they're small but critical inputs, particularly to permanent magnets motors, but also to other end products that are, very important for the energy transition. So wind turbines, hybrid and electric vehicles utilise those permanent magnets. And I guess one of the elements of Lynas, and being a Western Australian based business, we do benefit from the environmental and safety standards that David mentioned, very important to our industry, and we apply those in each of the jurisdictions that we operate. We also have plans and a project underway for a new Kalgoorlie rare earths processing facility, and that was the recipient of the Modern Manufacturing grant that David mentioned, but that will be where we undertake the first step in our processing before the materials are sent to either our facility in Malaysia or our future, we've got a proposed facility for the US as well. So it's a really exciting industry to be in. Rare earths, are critical inputs to many supply chains, and we certainly have an interesting and strategic position as the only significant or scale producer of separated rare earths outside China currently. So we, really see that we have an important role to play in supply chain diversity and supply chain resilience.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jennifer. You mentioned the US and Malaysia. We have to convince you that the UK is a good place too. So hopefully we'll do that today. Mark Thompson is next from Talga.
Hi, thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone. Mark Thompson, founder and managing director of Talga Group. We currently have got operations in the UK, in Cambridge. We have research and development facilities and science and staff, and we lodge IP. Actually, we have intellectual property that we handle out of the UK for our predominantly Swedish graphite-based products, which are battery materials, so anode, fully coated anode materials, and a range of next generation battery technologies and products. We also have pilot plants in operations in Germany and other operations in Asia and Japan, and more recently in Hong Kong. So the link though between, I guess, Australia and the UK for us on supply chains is that the UK, when it comes to the lithium-ion batteries in particular, as part of the electrification and sustainability challenge for the UK, is that nearly half of the entire volume of the active materials in lithium-ion batteries is graphite, of which the UK doesn't have any. And we see our short supply chain from our deposits in Sweden, which are the largest in Europe, that have fantastically low CO2 and sustainability aspects to them, could suit being processed or downstream worked on in the UK for local manufacturers, where you currently have got existing battery manufacturing and a massive car or a mobility transport sector which is looking to transition to electrification. And in Australia, we have got our corporate office and we raise capital here, and we have technology and IP that we generate from metallurgy and different processing techniques here as well. So I guess we already have a good foot in both camps. We're very excited about the agreements that have been taking place between Australia and the UK, and we see the UK as having some great opportunities and some great challenges, which I hope we can cover today, in how to set up these supply chains for various aspects of the electrification challenge that's happening.
Marvellous. Thank you, Mark. And now let's flip it on its head, and we'll look at what's available in Australia in the downstream. So we're going to hand over to Matt Pearson from Fleet Space.
Yeah, we're a little bit of an outlier, I guess. We're Fleet Space Technologies. I'm co-founder and COO. We build and operate a constellation of small satellites, and we're focused on connecting critical infrastructure, pretty much anything that the renewable boom is changing, and it's creating a lot of pressure on critical infrastructure that wasn't designed for two-way flow and all the rooftop solar that we have, especially in South Australia where we're based. But we're also really keen on critical mineral exploration and changing the game there. So providing real-time comms and accelerating exploration techniques that are kind of on the cutting edge. We're really excited about where, I mean, Australia's committed to going to the moon, NASA's going to the moon and Mars, and as a space company, we're interested in super scalable exploration techniques. We're not going to do this the way Buzz Aldrin did in the 60s. You know, when we return to the moon, we're really interested in using modern technologies for exploration, and it's turning out to have a really big impact on what we're doing with Australian mineral exploration projects as well. So kind of looking to accelerate things by 20 times, but more on that later, I guess. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. And so in the UK, very much our critical minerals are predominantly, not all, but predominantly focused in the southwest in Cornwall. And Cornwall is also where we have a number of space technology companies as well. So it seems to all fit nicely, and it seems to be mirrored around the world as well. So that's great. So we'll have to hook you up with those guys. So look, thank you ever so much. Again, if you're not speaking, if you could turn microphones off just quickly, because there's a little bit of background noise. What I want to do in this session is very quickly give these guys, who are obviously all our experts, the opportunity to talk. It's and I want to explore kind of the whole of the supply chain in both directions. What is there, what is required, and benefits, opportunities, and threats. So I guess we've got to start with probably looking at Tony, but looking at just how broad is the Australian offering in terms of critical minerals. We've got Mark and Tom here as well, and Jennifer, all in that space, but just how, because in the UK we're not talking about many companies. How massive are we talking?
Very, very, very large potential. Every state and territory of Australia has a resource endowment. West Australia, by its geology and sheer size, has the biggest endowment in Australia. But Queensland, Northern Territory, South Australia are all host significant deposits of various things. If you look at our history, it is pretty much based on quite a small number of minerals at scale. Bauxite, iron ore, of course, copper, lead, zinc, coal, that sort of thing. So in terms of, we have a bit large in ground endowment of a host of minerals, you know, really across the entire periodic table. But we haven't always mined and or explored for critical minerals. So oftentimes they weren't subject to exploration in the past because they weren't the valuable product. So there's almost now a second generation of exploration going on to go back and check what was walked over before. So I think it's probably fair to say we don't know really the full extent of our endowment. We know a lot, and we've got companies here who are developing those deposits, but there's a lot more to be found. And even in things like tailings, which we call secondary prospectivity, because back in the old days, those materials might have been bypassed because they weren't the target of development. So copper, cobalt deposits, we'll take the copper, leave cobalt behind. There's large deposits of cobalt sitting in tailings, for example. So the search space is really wide.
And for me, that's really interesting. We're doing an event with Canada on the circular economy, but just changing that narrative around the circular economy, not just to, you know, binning your iPhone or your mobile phone, but also what is in the tailings, what has been missed previously. And so it's good to hear that that's kind of there. And so Tom, Jennifer, you guys are operating in Australia. I mean, yeah, how, from your industry perspective, what's your view in terms of how easy it is, how much is going on, and then also, you know, looking internationally, We'll get into that in the next, I guess, when we talk to Mark in a second. But yeah, your view there.
Well, Jennifer, I can jump in quickly there. So I guess from our perspective, looking more closely within Queensland, within the jurisdiction that we're operating, as Tony said, there's been some target minerals up there for the last couple of decades, but what we're finding now is that deposits like our own and others in that area that really there might have been a little bit known about it for the last couple of decades, but they haven't been properly explored, and that's the more broadly the opportunity that we're seeing, and with that, seeing multiple new exploration companies being formed, even within the last year or two. There's more coming to market, and there's an availability of capital to go and explore for these minerals that, you know, for a long time we just really didn't have a market, and with that there's the standards of Queensland, and this is probably more broadly within Australia, that mean that the products that we bring to market when we start these operations will be from a jurisdiction with high environmental standards and workplace standards, and that's going to be quite important for the end users of these products, in, you know, particularly within the more ESG sensitive areas.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I think it is, you know, the real opportunity for Australia that we do have such high ESG standards. And as far as the, you know, we're seeing demand accelerating for rare earths, the market's growing, and it's, you know, exciting. It is an exciting time to be in the industry. Western Australia, and Tony might correct me, but I have heard that Western Australia has pretty much all of the critical minerals in its abundant resources. So it is an exciting position to be in as well. And I think, you know, as we look to some of those increased expectations, you know, being able to provide responsible, traceable rare earths and other critical minerals is becoming increasingly important to customers as well.
Well, that's good to, and I guess on the ESG side of things, you know, it's technology like fleet space, etc., that's allowing people to actually do this exploration in a way that wasn't possible 10, 20 years ago.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, what we're looking for is you want to explore with very low impact techniques, and we're seeing this across the board. Loads of old techniques are kind of being updated to kind of low power sensors, things that can be hand carried into sensitive environments. You know, so you want to be able to explore huge areas much faster without disturbing and without worrying too much about getting all the permitting that goes with more invasive techniques. So low impact exploration techniques are definitely in vogue, and those are the sorts of things that we're connecting, so you can be getting those results in real time as well. So putting out large arrays of passive sensors and getting results back in real time. And I think that's really exciting. So being responsible about how we go and explore for these mineral deposits as well, and how we validate deposits quickly. And that's the sort of thing that it's not just better for the environment and for ESG across the board, but it's also just more economical, you know, vastly more economical to be responsible. So it's a nice combination.
Oh, yeah, and that kind of leads us on very nicely. Thanks, Matt. I guess there's three things really happening globally at the moment. Obviously, there's this push towards ESG and being environmentally social governance, and that being a core part of business. The second part is obviously the fact that these are absolutely necessary, and there is the determined criticality to what we're talking about and their role in it. And then finally is, you know, this is a global industry. So from the UK, we have this 10-point plan, and the objective is to be, you know, a regional leader in electric vehicles, in wind turbines, in space, defense, etc. But you can't do that without critical minerals. So as a nation, as we say in the strategic review, we're looking to build partner nation relationships. And of course, it's very hard to look past Australia, given what you guys have said and the breadth of what you have to offer. So what I kind of wanted to just pick up on then is, before we look at the international kind of issues around the supply chain, was very much kind of, obviously industry is driving this because there's an economic need for this, but is it states, or is it the government, or is it the states who are really helping to push this? Is there a combined approach? Who's got a thought on that one? Because from the UK, we just have a government. We don't have states to deal with. It's a lot easier. Well, I think it's a lot easier. So it's a bit, for our English and British viewers to try and understand the system over in Australia.
Perhaps as a government representative, maybe I'll have a try, Jeff. So Australia has 8 governments, the federal government and the states and territories. Federal government is responsible for, the big picture, defence and foreign affairs and tax, and with David, with Austrade, for example. But really the action, the boots on the ground occurs at state and territory level, which does make it difficult because they are different in terms of their different rules and regulations and how to navigate through that. That's why every state and territory will have a trade agency of some kind to try and help people navigate through, understand, the touch points, to acquire tenure, for example, to establish a company, to meet environmental requirements. So we could do better in terms of coordination of government, but that's also a big ask in a country that is a federation. But there is a lot of cooperation. David outlined a number of federal government initiatives around funding, particularly. There's a critical minerals office that's quite relevant. That's only about 2 years old now, almost. It just sends a signal, though, that the federal government is certainly interested in this space and they're providing funding. I know that the states and territories are also very keen, because part of it is about diversifying their economy, realising advantage from the energy transition in particular. That is offering huge opportunity across the board, for rare earths, for vanadium. That's just 2 of the representative commodities here we're talking about today. But there's many others too. So governments get that. They get that there's a huge opportunity. And I guess where we are in time, though, is that, going back to that point I made a few minutes ago, our history is centered around, precious metals, gold and silver, base metals, iron ore, bauxite, that sort of thing. Our supply chains are similarly designed around those commodities. The problem we have is the rapid demand growth we've seen in recent times has exceeded our ability to create those new supply chains. It's also the market sector that dominates those new critical mineral areas, particularly, are often what we call junior companies. They're smaller in terms of market capitalisation. So government is starting to, I think, shift its view to recognising that the old approach of where a big company, big discovery can fund infrastructure, that doesn't work anymore. It needs a different approach and government has a part to play. Perhaps Tom, maybe a live example.
Yep. I thought you might touch on it, Tony, but to continue on from what Tony said, firstly, I'll just make a quick point about the work that the Geological Survey does in providing data sets for explorers, and that's a key part of starting that process to de-risk areas a little bit and help attract investment for those early stage projects. But as a recent example, the Queensland government yesterday announced a $10 million funding package to build a vanadium demonstration plant in Townsville. This is for the purpose of demonstrating the minerals processing flow sheet for the vanadium region that we have in Queensland, and it's for a number of companies. It's a common user facility, but it's really enabling that industry, and the intention of government is to, by providing that infrastructure, can expedite the feasibility work and production of samples for off-takers and so on. That's part of the process, can expedite that and help bring that region online quicker than the individual companies would be able to do themselves.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Okay, so there's a little bit of a joined up approach coming into play, and obviously in the UK, you know, we have a history of mining that goes back thousands of years, but we kind of lost it after we closed most of the coal mines, and we're rediscovering that. And it's good to hear what you just said, Tom and Tony, because there's a lot of synergy of kind of where we want to be as a nation and an industry over the next couple of years. That being said, the UK can't do all of this by itself, and we find ourselves in a regional competition to build the downstream. But without the downstream, before you get to the downstream, you've got to have a midstream. You've got to refine and beneficiate. And I guess kind of where I'm coming from there is I know Australia is looking to build that midstream and capture that added value to the products and shift away from that, as Tony said, old approach that we've all used for so long. But at the same time, the UK, I think, recognizes that if we're going to be the destination of choice for you guys, then we also need to build a midstream and try and capture some of that at a regional level as well. Yeah, especially with the rules of origins that's going through Brexit. So who's got something to say on kind of the midstream, either back in Australia, globally, or what we're doing in the UK? What's needed, what's required, how difficult it is? I mean, Jennifer, it must be, rare earths is a difficult space to operate in. You guys are yeah, the winners outside of China. So yeah, have you got any thoughts?
It is a challenging field, and you know, if you've followed Lynas's journey, it hasn't been an easy one in getting to where we are now. But it's certainly, you know, as to answer your first question, which is, are you looking, you know, is Australia looking to do more onshore? Certainly we are, and our Kalgoorlie facility will be, you know, one opportunity for us to do more of the processing onshore in Australia. But yes, you do need those downstream supply chains to feed into as well, and we certainly see benefits in being close to the customers for some of that end products, where we are refining things to very specific specifications from our customers. It's helpful to be close to our customers in that regard, but certainly, you know, keen to do more in Australia, and our Kalgoorlie facility will be part of that. And on the government side, you know, the government, Australian government, the Western Australian government, and even our local governments in Western Australia will be very supportive of our industry. We certainly see that, and I think that does help. But agree that, you know, when it comes to shared infrastructure, those types of things, that there is definitely a role for governments to play in that.
That's really interesting. I'm just going to jump over. I see Mark's ready to pounce as well, but just having to think about that. I mean, the whole point of this takeover is to try and identify where collaboration can take place. Is there a role for joint government collaboration between the UK government and whether it be states or Australia? Would that help?
Yes, I imagine there is, and we're certainly starting to see that happen a lot more with the Australian government and agreements with various governments around the world to partner and facilitate those critical minerals supply chains. So I think it is very beneficial.
Okay, Mark, you're ready. Leaning in.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the pouncing, but well, I mean, specifically part of your question was, well, does government have a role, why can't it just stay out of it? I guess is maybe what the taxpayer would say is, if this is all such a great idea, why doesn't the commercialisation happen under the normal capital things? The answer is because, frankly, the economics around some countries just doesn't work. The minerals are where the minerals are. If you do not have them, in the case of, say, Britain doesn't have some at all, straight away you have a situation therefore you cannot expect to fill every part of a very complex supply chain from there. And the argument for a commercial group to go in there and do something when it doesn't exist or is very difficult, it's hopeless, really. So you can either buy the bullet and just admit you can't build it and get on with doing other things, or you need to facilitate it because the commercial side doesn't stack up. Another big part of this is power. Most processing industries involved in this midstream or downstream are very, very power intensive, and your power costs are high, or your grid is dirty. You got too much coming from petro sources, which doesn't fit with the ESG aspects of investing in these materials. So for these strategic minerals, obviously it's not very strategic if you don't have them to begin with. So you have to become competitive to attract attention, and you're competing with other countries that are doing the same thing. And so, frankly, if the governments don't get quite active, if they keep talking to it but not actually taking action about it, it doesn't mean you can pick that ball up later. It'll go. Once these industries get established somewhere else, they're very hard to dislodge. They can run for a long time. So government's got a huge role to play across power costs, trying to free up the grid in lots of ways, helping facilitate groups with different sustainable power sources to be able to get set up, to help offset R&D and different aspects of intellectual property and getting spread between different groups, trying to cut down barriers on red tape, green tape, just facilitating and greasing the wheels so that, frankly, we can do what we do best, which is bringing the technologies and bringing all the solutions and bringing as much commercial and investment that we can. But your enemy is time, and your enemy is the local costs and distortions that exist. And so government's got a massive role to play. And frankly, if they don't play it, if they just sort of keep talking to it and publish lots of reports, but don't physically go out and make changes, then these are the countries that will lose out compared to the very aggressive countries and local governments that really do set up good conditions.
Yeah, and look, I think the reality is we're playing in a monopolized global sector. That's the reality, and certainly it's interesting to hear Australian companies and Australian government talking about the role of government being there to support and facilitate and push, given the politics of Australia looking from the UK across. So it's really interesting and actually heartening to feel that, because it's something that we've been working towards in the UK is what is the role of the states and where do they play. So I guess then I've got two questions or three questions left. So the first one is Mark, probably more to Mark, Jennifer and Tom, is obviously the UK wants to be a player regionally. We've got AUKUS, we've got a shared history. Those bloody Europeans are hard to deal with. No, they're not, they're lovely. But how do we make the UK your landing destination in this region of the world?
I'll let someone else go first. I'll come in if needed.
I think from our perspective, it's building the downstream industries. So, our materials are inputs into permanent magnets, other things. So I think it's if there's a vibrant downstream industry, then that's an attractive place to be.
Okay. Well, we've got less common metals, and they're the best. So there you go. I don't know if they're on the call. If they are, then I've just given them a shout out. There we go. Tom, Mark.
Look, I mean, from our perspective, talking probably more specifically about our industry, small incentives go a long way. We know there's a big market there. It's established. There's a need for storage, and more broadly than just vanadium batteries, there's a large need across multiple technologies, and the opportunity is there for companies like us who are here looking at where we might go within Europe. It is competitive. There's other countries that are looking to incentivise this sort of manufacturing. So, quite, I guess, bluntly, that's the answer. It is competitive.
Okay, thank you. And Mark.
Yeah, look, I've already mentioned power. I think doing trying to play a role. I know sometimes not always possible, but playing a role in power and solving problems on the grid to make it cleaner and lower cost is a big decision maker for us about where to go and what to do. I think the technologies there are great. I think the intellectual property development and the tax regime is actually pretty good. I think there's a lot of local red tape and land ownership issues about building operations, which can be helped a lot by government as well. The customers, I agree very much with Jennifer, having downstream customers that want to build with your product obviously locally is important, so you're not re-exporting, because then it just doesn't make much sense being there. I think these Freeport, I think this initiative around setting up Freeports is quite a winner. I think that makes a big difference. And the other thing is permitting speed, which is often a local council sort of thing. If you want to set up an operation, all the hurdles you have to go through, and I think actually the UK is pretty good at that as well. I think obviously you've got this distance issue, and that you do obviously have to ship stuff there, unless you can rail small amounts of it through the tunnel. But overall, it comes down to the fundamentals. I think the labour costs are actually pretty good these days, and the skills are awesome. We like working in the UK a lot. We like the attitude. Like, there's a lot of can-do attitude. I think also within the bureaucracy, or what I shouldn't call bureaucracy, but within administration and government admin, there's a lot of really passionate people that really believe in trying to make this sustainability shift, and I think that's to the credit of that ecosystem you have in government there, and what they're really trying to change things. It's not just political all the time and point scoring. We see real people really putting their hard work and careers on the line to make changes. So it's pretty good, but the fundamentals always come down to stuff in, stuff out, and those costs unfortunately are relatively high there compared to other places, and it's yet to be seen if the benefits can overcome that.
Fair enough. Cheers everyone. So I've just seen Less Common Metals flag something up on the chat, so there you go. We've already created some links, which is good. But we've talked about then stuff from Australia coming over to the UK. Obviously, we have stuff that is coming out of the ground, and we have industry experts. How do we come over to Australia? I guess two questions. First, Matt, is there any chance we can get fleet space into the UK? Is there a market there that you're interested in? And also, what are you looking for, both yourselves, Tony, Tom, Jennifer, what are you looking for the UK in terms of our companies, our people, looking eastwards to Australia? What can we bring to Australia? And how do we do that? So yeah, those two questions.
I guess in our industry, in the satellite industry, the dominant player in industrial, like IoT communications in space, is Inmarsat. So they've really been the dominant player there with their offerings, mainly focused on maritime, but supporting mining and supply chain, robotic trains, all those sorts of things. They're all satellite connected. So we've had many pleasant conversations with Inmarsat and work with them quite closely. So there's already that kind of relationship. I think we're strongly considering having more of a presence in the UK as well. going forward once we can actually go there. So I'll actually be there next month. So finally, I'm escaping. So I think that's so Australian industry is using UK satellites constantly now. And we're hoping that that'll go both ways for maritime and the other part of the supply chain is all those ships and things. So we're looking to provide unlimited data ultimately over our satellite network and change the game again. So there's a lot of innovation in the satellite space, and that's all to do with being able to. I mean, there are provenance issues there. Being able to track resources as they cross the world is really important. Knowing where they come from, underpinning all these robotic systems, all the rail, all the ships, all those things need to be connected so that we can know what is going on, and also so that we have really efficient supply chains. All of that stuff breaks down. I mean, the reports on train derailments and things like that it's ridiculous how many times cars go off the rails and things in the middle of nowhere. So knowing where that's happening and knowing how to avoid those sorts of things are important. I can really only speak from our experience in the satellite industry and in the mining industry and those sorts of relationships. But I think that collaboration is kind of happening, and we'd like to see a lot more of it, basically.
Jeff, perhaps just a few thoughts from the government side once again. I think what the UK can offer to Australia, a couple of things. One is market certainty and longevity, because I think that we're talking about significant investments are required and long payback times are required to get some of these new bits of kit in place, like a rare earth processing plant, for example, and not a cheap bit of kit. And that's just one commodity group. So I think there's that market, capital markets, customer markets piece. But the other aspect too is around the way mining should operate into the future. And that's the whole world of ESG and being responsible and ethical, minimising our carbon footprint, minimising our footprint generally in terms of environment. So what are the technologies we can apply to reduce our footprint, reduce our water usage, reduce our energy usage as we extract minerals? Because it's only going to get more and more stringent as we truly become circular economy, how we can minimise our inputs to derive those things that we need for renewable energy technology, for example. So there's that piece around technology. It covers things like digitalisation of supply chains, that sort of thing. So there's a big piece that I don't understand of what the UK potential is in that space.
Jeff, we're seeing some potential in the midstream and downstream technology sector from UK companies. In fact, the company we're procuring our electrolyte plant from is actually based in the UK. There's a number of battery companies there that are doing some great things. So it might be that it's more the technology sector that fits with part of our process and part of our midstream, mining and midstream processes where the two can start to come together and find some opportunities there.
Okay, and so kind of listening to you guys, then it seems that the sensible way to approach this would not almost be on a project by project basis, but also almost on a supply chain. So taking the entirety of a supply chain and looking at how both nations can work together. And so perhaps we'll go into some questions now that are coming through on the chat in a second. But my kind of thinking there is you guys have got great projects, and it's obvious that the states and the government are all piling in behind you and supporting you, which is marvelous. The UK wants to build those relationships, and we have that kind of growing relationship now that we've had Brexit. But it just seems to me that if we're to build the downstream and the midstream and the upstream all at the same time, then someone has to be looking at the entirety of the supply chain at the same time. And as we're operating in a monopolized global sector, that becomes complicated and is also global. We're going to need more satellites, Matt. Yeah, it's been a great conversation and very wide ranging, I know, but I think the opportunities for both nations to collaborate are there. We just have to find a way of making that happen, because there's obviously great opportunities. And going back to what Mark said, the free ports could be a great starting point if we can crack on with those. All of those in attendance, we've got some time now quickly before we go into some breakout sessions. So please do add some questions in for everyone. Otherwise, I'll keep on asking questions. And I'm sure our panelists would like to hear from someone smarter. So let's go through some questions and have a look. Do you think blockchain can improve the UK-Australia mineral supply chain? Is this something governments can do themselves, or they need third-party, private sector involvement, etc.?
Sorry, if I could jump in, I think we're on discussions today at a meeting in the Queensland government. We see it as a fundamental part of the future way we operate, not just in the resource sector and mining, but across all parts of government in terms of verifiable and accredited performance of companies, for example. We just see it as an efficiency gain, if nothing else. But I think that also for customer destinations, it'll be a requirement. And as we know, the EU battery passport is only, 4 years away.
Okay.
So absolutely yes, from our perspective.
Yeah. And I know we've got a couple of blockchain companies and some other tech companies around there joining in the workshop later, which will be looking at ESG, track, trace and provenance. So I'm sure we'll have more information and more discussions around that next. We'd like to hear about the benefits to our defence industries and supply chain benefits from Australia and the UK working together. I know down in South Australia, BAE Systems are building a whole fleet of frigates, and obviously with the space technology there as well. So does anyone have any views on AUKUS and the kind of role critical minerals and closer critical mineral collaboration can play?
Perhaps if I'm okay to jump in, sorry, I don't mean to dominate conversation. This is part of what we do in our department, Geology Survey and so on, is engage with foreign markets. So traditionally it's been North Asia, China, Korea, Japan. Not so much China anymore, you may have read about that. But certainly we're keen to build our market presence in Europe and the UK. And there's a lot of activity in that space that we can just see. And I think AUKUS provides a natural coalition between us and the UK. And it talks about security of supply. And it may be that there's a premium to be paid for that security to cover the high cost of setting up some of these supply chains. But I do think that the strategic relationship between Australia, the US and the UK does lend itself to almost another layer of supply chain, which is based around security of supply particularly. And I guess Lynas is a great example of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when we've done, I mean, the CMA has now been operating for 2 years and has become a voice of critical minerals in the UK and other nations. And I think when we talk about supply chains, it's supply chain vulnerability and its ESG credentials, kind of two of the key issues. Is how do you ensure that your downstream is going to have those critical minerals in place? And how do you ensure they're going to meet societal demands once they're in, once the consumer has them? And those are two very complex supply chain based things. So I think, there will be a premium added to that. I'm sure of it. I'm sure that, your VWs and your Polestars and your Teslas are going to have to pay extra cash to ensure that they've got that security of supply, and that when people dig down into the ESG, it's all there and it's above board. So it's complex. And I guess on top of that, and this isn't in the chat, but it's just from my point of view, is we all have a role to play from, you know, Matt, your satellites and what you're doing to ensure that things are done in a most technologically advanced way, down to what we're doing. It is the perception of critical minerals and you know, their impact on the environment and stuff. So I guess across both of our nations, that's something we have to collaboratively work on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, again, the space industry, the UK and Australia have a really long history of collaboration. Some of the first rocket launches and things, some of the first ever in the 40s were UK, Australia collaborations up in Woomera, here in South Australia. And, you know, you mentioned BAE and there's a real focus on, in Australia at the moment, on building sovereign capability. All the modern manufacturing work that David was talking about is really focused on building supply chain for defence as well. But that doesn't mean that, I mean, Australia's nascent space industry also needs a lot of help. So there's a lot of heritage, and the UK space industry is further ahead. So you know, there's a lot of expertise that we're looking to bring across, in the same way that, kind of on a smaller scale than the frigates, slightly smaller scale, but those sort of collaborations are really important. I think it's an interesting thing. If you think, like, we're gonna, there's critical minerals that are involved in these sorts of advanced technologies and advanced sensors and things that are going into orbit. So securing supply of those is obviously, you know, underpins all the work. If you're going to go and build these sorts of systems and you don't have a ready supply of critical minerals, and this is why we're having this conversation, but there are certain things that you want to be able to do in space that, you know, where we've got this supply of resources in Australia. We've got the high-end manufacturing just beginning. There is so much in the middle that, you know, to process those minerals that just has to be built up. Otherwise, you still end up with a crazy supply chain. Even our small satellites bounce around the world many times before they go to space. So, you know, getting everything together. And it is an absolute nightmare managing just our supply chain, even when it's not, you know, we're not in the midst of COVID. So look, the more that we can do close to home, the more we can do under one roof. You know, I always think about Henry Ford built his first factories right next to a steel mill. So, you know, steel would come straight out and go straight into cars. And I think the more we can adopt that philosophy here, the better. And the more we can get the expertise flowing across the world as well to enable those processes, the better.
Perfect. Okay. I want to pick up on then just a tangent to what you just said, is a question that's come in here from Max. And as we transition and we build that supply chain and we build that kind of wider approach, what will the mining workforce or the supply chain workforce look like in a generation from now? Are we talking about swarm technology drones, or, you know, does moving towards that? What does that look like?
Definitely all the robots.
All the robots. Okay.
I would say all the robots. I mean, you know, you look at Rio Tinto and their robotic train. There's some of the, I mean, that's the largest robotic system in the world. But I agree that there are a lot more smaller systems. You know, what we're doing in exploration is also being changed by, okay, you can get real-time comms, you can have passive sensors, but ultimately you still need to go and put things on the ground all over the place, and that's very labor intensive, and that itself, even though it's minimally invasive, can still be annoying. So being able to do this, there are so many programs around the world now doing drone deployment. So everything from obviously when we're extracting and then transporting resources, but the entire and the entire supply chain and the entire exploration phase will be roboticized very fast. So I think, I mean, even in the next 10 years, I think we're going to see more and more transformation. Yeah, people are dipping their toe in now, but I mean, the robotic labor force is coming very fast in mining.
And I guess it's scalability, isn't it? I mean, if you're an Anglo, BHP, etc., then you're going to have the finance and the ability to bring in that tech at a much faster speed than a junior 3-4 man exploration firm. So it's going to be kind of still over time, but I think you're right. It's probably all heading in that direction.
There might be, sorry, there might be opportunity for junior explorers to leverage things more quickly and to I guess to multiply their effort through robotics as well. We're seeing that with some of the research organizations we're working with, where suddenly you've got a whole lot of people doing analysis of a data set. You can train a simple algorithm to do what should be quite simple work. It's a really good use of machine learning, and suddenly you can do 1,000 times the work in seconds. I mean, this keeps happening every day. We have another breakthrough where real-time comms and then real-time processing just changes the game. So yeah, I think there's that multiplication of effort that's coming as well.
So I guess then at that exploration level, that's where, Tony, I guess government and states and territories and the UK government can pile in and support the exploration and the junior sector more to bring that technological advances and keep up with their big cousins who are more focused on bulk at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that goes across a number of areas too. One is around how we might move to extraction, but the other one is around, for example, monitoring emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. That really should start at the exploration stage. So how does a small company get the infrastructure in place to do that and to measure it and to report? So there's different dimensions. I think that junior end, we need to help them get up to speed with that, or have a service model where they can call that in somehow. I don't know, but somehow or other we're going to have to help those very energetic explorers that we need to look in frontier areas and take those exploration risks, to help them operate in a way that doesn't see them get penalised down the track, for example, by accruing a carbon emissions debt or something like that. So I think there's definitely a role to help the sector or supply chain get up and get going, but bringing along those people who are the people who make it happen, the junior explorers, the developers, the infrastructure providers, that sort of thing. So it does need a holistic approach.
Perfect. Okay. We've got a final few questions come through, and then what we're going to do is we're going to transition over into some workshops where they'll be led by Sarah Gordon from Tata, doing one on ESG, traceability, and provenance. So we've got a good number of companies in there who'll be speaking, and also we'll be doing one on market access, which will be led by Darren Quayle from Worley. So I'm sure a lot of the conversations that we've had so far will actually be kind of added to that. And we've got some really excellent people coming in to speak specifically in there, but also again, if you have an interest and you're attending, then please use those workshops to raise your views. Final couple of questions on here. Do we see the UK being able to develop that midstream that you guys require? So the reality is in Europe, if we're going to build gigafactories, if we're going to build cars, if we're going to build gigafactories, then they will be placed near to where the, like Henry Ford, we placed near the steel mill, they'll be placed near the midstream. Is the UK in a position where it can be that regional kind of midstream player? Is that what you guys are looking for? And if so, what does it need to do? And then the final question is, are we seeing the mining industry or the mineral extraction industry and its supply chain transitioning? Is the era of bulk mining shifting to smaller, more agile companies who are there on the coal front? It's the wrong word. Out there doing the exploration.
Jeff, I'm happy to pitch in. On that midstream question, I'm perhaps an example. So I mentioned a little while ago that we engage with European markets, and we engaged with France recently, and they gave an example of where I think France had signed a supply agreement for minerals from Canada, and that caused protests in France, apparently because of the mineral miles of bringing like a raw material from so far away. I think that might be the thing that trips us up if in thinking of processing in the UK. If I understand, that's like midstream mineral processing, for example, refining. It just depends if we can overcome this issue around transporting at such a long distance, and the emissions piece, the ESG, the E part especially, might be a hurdle there, which might favour localising as much of that close to the deposits, close to the source, and moving the least amount of material.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. And I mean, Mark, you've already spoken about issues with creating, energy prices and other stuff in the UK. The opportunity is there, but we need to move relatively quickly, or the ball will be taken by Europe. So I guess that's the message that we need to pass on. And then finally, are we seeing the transition from the majors being the powerhouse of the mining sector to 10, 20 years time, where it'll be predominantly smaller, more agile companies who have been in this space?
Well, on the industry, I mean, I've got a background in exploration and mineral development, and I would sort of dispute that. I think it's got a sort of natural look to it, that because permitting of new operations is so hard, it does make sense that existing operations should just expand, and that'll be that's mostly in the hands of large-ish companies and large operations just getting bigger. But there's been a really huge change over the last few years. There's so many more smaller companies that are now not just looking for the basic raw commodities, but they're bolting on downstream components. They're getting more into technology. They're getting more into minerals that they never would have had to have dealt with before, where they have to have sales and marketing. They have to have interaction directly with some advanced chemical customer instead of a raw materials trader. So I think the overall environment is actually for smaller companies to take on the supplies of all of these, particularly critical minerals. There's very large swath of more obscure minerals instead of just the big four, or as it were. So I think it's actually a pretty healthy ecosystem that's developing around smaller companies dominating all these things that the large companies just wouldn't be able to justify going into because it doesn't hit their bottom line enough. So I think we're actually going to have a golden age where hopefully the capital's still available from the markets continuing to operate and pay people enough and take a punt and invest in these things getting going. But I'd say that sector is more vibrant and capable of delivering a lot more of the diverse sorts of critical minerals that are required for this this overall shift that needs to happen, rather than just the large ones.
So that's well, thank you, Mark. So the athlete hasn't changed, but the game has.